So thank you everyone for coming to the mental health conversation tonight. Before we get started, I would just like to take an opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the North and South Piikani Nations, the Kainai Tribe, including other members of the Treaty 7 Nations, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the three bands of the Stoney Nakoda Nations, the Chiniki, Wesley, and Bearspaw. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, and all those who have made a home in this area. Next, I would like to introduce our speaker for the night. So this is Jessi Beyer. She is an international award nominated speaker, mental health advocate, and a #1 best-selling author on how to heal, a practical guide to 9 natural therapies you can use to release your trauma. She was named a 2020 Young Entrepreneur to Watch. She has been featured in dozens of media outlets, including Elite Daily, Thrive Global, and Best Company. And she has spoken to thousands of people across the country at places like Denver University and Missouri State University. Outside of her professional life, Jessi is a canine search and rescue handler and a proud pet mom. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jessi and she can get started with her presentation.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction. I never really know what to say to that. So thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, all of you guys, for choosing to spend your evening with me. I'm really excited to share some information with you about how you can be a good support system for someone who's struggling with their mental health. Now, a couple housekeeping items as we get started. First of all, if you guys wouldn't mind staying muted throughout the presentation, I would greatly appreciate it. It's not because I don't want to hear from you. It's just that I want to make sure we don't have any background noise or interference throughout the presentation. In addition, we are going to be having a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, please just hold them to the end. That way I don't miss them during the presentation, and I'll be able to answer all of those at the end. This is also a topic that can be very personal for some people, right? We are talking about mental health. That can be very personal, very emotional. So if at any moment you need to take a break, step away, leave the room, please feel free to do that. I will not be offended. I probably won't even know. So feel free to take that time if you need it. And we're not going to be talking about anything super deep or gory or anything like that. But just again, if you do need that time, please feel free to take it. Finally, as I pull up my slides, I would love to get to know you guys a little bit better. We are also going to be using the chat throughout the presentation. So I want to make sure that you guys know where that is and are familiar with that. So as I pull up my slides, if you could let me know in the chat what year you are and what you're studying, that would be great. So what year you are in school and then what you're studying, and I will get my slides pulled up here. Now the technical difficulty is getting the chat pulled up at the same time. All right, we're going to figure this out. There we go. All right. Sorry about that, everyone. I feel like Zoom updates every other week and there's always some sort of thing that's happening. Hi, chat box. Where are you? Hang on, guys. We're going to make this work. Really? Okay, why does it do that? Okay, chat. There we go. Now we got it. Beautiful. Okay, perfect. So we have second year behavioral sciences, staff member at Ambrose, Emily, awesome. Thank you for being here. Fourth year music major, amazing. I am very musically challenged, so I'm impressed by that. Anyone else want to chime in here before we dive in? All right, awesome. So as you can see on the screen, what we're going to be talking about today is how you can be a really good support system for someone who's struggling with their mental health. Now, there are two key words on the screen here that I want to point out. The first of which is safely, and the second of which is successfully. I want you guys to leave this presentation having all the tools and knowledge to be a good support system, and that's the successfully piece. But I also want you to know how to do it in a way that's keeping yourself safe during the process and making sure that you are supported and your boundaries are enforced. That's the safely piece. So we're going to be diving into both of those today. But before we do, I do want to give a very brief intro of myself. Madison did a fantastic job, so I really don't have to do much here. But like she said, my name is Jessi Beyer. I'm an author of a book about trauma healing, and I'm also a speaker like I'm doing tonight here with you guys. In addition, I'm also a trauma and mental illness survivor myself. So not only are the things that I'm sharing things that I've learned from my educational and professional background, but also things that I learned from personal experience. Finally, I am a University of Minnesota alumnus, and we were the Golden Gophers for our mascot, which I feel like is probably the worst mascot on the planet. So you guys definitely have me beat when it comes to mascots. Now, the story that I want to start off this presentation with starts with this question. Have you ever eaten chicken off the floor? Now you're probably thinking, how does this have anything to do with mental health? But this was a very pivotal moment in my mental health journey. When I was in high school, I was in a relationship with someone who was really struggling with his mental health, depression, anxiety, self-harm, suicidal tendencies, all of those things. And when he opened up to me about his struggles, I felt so special. I felt honored. I felt like I was the most important person on the world, and I would do whatever it took to keep him happy and keep him alive. This meant I was answering calls whenever he needed to. I was lying to the school's counselor, my parents, his parents. I was giving him my body, my time, my emotions, literally anything that I thought would keep him alive and keep him breathing. Now, like I said, I felt very special because of this. I felt so responsible and so much like an adult. And as you can probably imagine, that was not the best way to approach that relationship. One promise that I had him make me during that relationship was that if he did decide to take his own life, he would give me a hug first. Now, this promise served two purposes. The first of which was so that I would know and I could do something to prevent it. But the second was so that if I chose not to prevent it, if I chose to let him go through with that decision, I could be there with him as he moved from where he currently was to where he was going to be next. You may be wondering why in the world I would even consider letting him go through with that when I had just talked about how I would do whatever it took to keep him alive. But I understood how hurt and angry and betrayed I would feel if he took that choice away from me. And so I could only imagine how angry and hurt and betrayed he would feel if I took that choice away from him. Now, it was the spring of my junior year of high school. I had just gotten home from track practice and I was eating some leftover chicken in the kitchen. I got a text from him that said, "Can you come over and say goodbye?" Now, that was the one and only time in my life I have ever blacked out. And I woke up on the floor surrounded by chicken, hopped in my car and drove over to his house. On that drive, I had that decision to make. Do I call the police and prevent this from happening, or do I allow him this choice in his life? I decided to call the police to intervene, and that night ended about as you'd expect, with him being led out of the house in handcuffs and taken to involuntary psychiatric hold. The next time that I heard from him after that night was a text, and it said, "I trusted you." Now that night broke me, and I presume that my precarious mental state at the time didn't really help matters, but we both came out of that relationship a lot worse because of the mistakes that I made in supporting him. I did so many things incorrectly. I took on way too much responsibility. I obliterated my own boundaries. And like I said, I truly believe that we both came out of that relationship a lot worse for wear because I did not do a good job. What I want to do today is share with you everything that I learned from that relationship and since that relationship, so you don't have to go through that same level of pain and hurt and confusion that I did. There's going to be three parts to this presentation. The first of which is what not to say, because some of the most common things we think of to say to someone who's struggling with their mental health can actually be incredibly hurtful and detrimental to their healing journey. The second part is going to be what to do, how to support them, what are some strategies you can use. And then the third part of the presentation is going to be, like I said, about how to keep yourself safe during the process. Again, at the end of those three parts, we are going to have a Q&A session. But during this first part, this is where we're going to be using the chat box. So what's going to happen is I'm going to put a sentence on the screen, a sentence that you shouldn't say to someone who's struggling with their mental health. And I want you to put yourself in their shoes for a moment and think about how you would feel if you were on the receiving end of that sentence. For example, if I put up the sentence, "Bananas are the best fruit in the world," and you hate bananas, like you really, really have a personal hatred for bananas, then maybe you would feel disgusted, invalidated, unheard, whatever those feelings would be. I want you guys to let me know those in the chat when I put up the sentence about mental health. The reason we're doing this is because I want you to kind of get an understanding of what it could feel like to hear one of these sentences after you've just opened up to someone about your struggles. All of these things are things that I personally have been told, okay? So maybe some of these you're like, I would never say this to someone, and that's amazing. But we still need to talk about them because people still continue to say them. So the first sentence we're going to discuss is, I know what you're going through. So perhaps you open up to me about your struggles with depression, for example. And I respond with, oh my gosh, I know what you're going through. I went through the exact same thing, and then just kind of launch into my story of my own mental health struggles. How would that make you feel if that's how I responded to you opening up about your story? Let me know that in the chat, okay? You guys, I am one of those instructors that will wait you out in the chat. So definitely get engaged here to make this more fun for all of us. Okay, we have like, I wasn't being heard. Absolutely. A lot of students also say they would feel invalidated. They would feel like they're making it all about the other person. We also have ignored. Absolutely. And those are really powerful things, right? My experience was devalued. 100%. So as someone who's opening up about their mental health struggles, you don't want to feel devalued or unheard or ignored or any of those things. And unless you went through the exact same thing as the person who's opening up to you, and you have the exact same psychological and physiological makeup as that person, you don't really know what they're going through. When you tell someone this, it can seem like you're kind of minimizing the effects of their struggles. Like, it's no big deal. I went through the same thing and I came out the other end totally fine. It's really not that big of a deal. But to that person that's opening up to you, it's incredibly real. It's very important to them. It's very hurtful. And even more importantly than that, it's theirs. It's their experience. It's their emotions. And for you to come in and make it all about you, that really takes away from the validity of what they're experiencing. The next sentence we're going to discuss is, I'm so sorry for you. Okay. This happens a lot when you really don't know what else to say. And so, for example, if you told me that your mom just got diagnosed with breast cancer, and I say, I am so sorry for you, and maybe nod my head and put my hand on your shoulder for emphasis, but that's really all I had to say on the matter. How would that make you feel? Okay, let me know in the chat. What would you want to say back to me? How would that make you feel? Think about that for a second and then let me know in the chat. Like, you pity me? Absolutely. That's the thing, you guys, is there's a huge difference between sympathy and pity and empathy. And there's a line there. We're going to talk about that line, okay? So at the end of the day, this person is a survivor. They're not a victim. And when you tell someone that you're sorry for them, you're labeling them as a victim and as someone requiring sympathy and pity. When you think of a victim, right, your stereotypical damsel in distress, they're weak, they're helpless, they're incapable of saving themselves. And that's not really a good mindset to have when you're trying to heal from a mental health struggle. The other reason that this isn't the best thing to say is apologies can become devalued. I'm of the opinion that you should only apologize when two criteria are met. The first of which is that you actually did something wrong. You did an action that caused another person harm. And the second criteria is that you have an intent to change your actions so that it doesn't happen again. No matter how powerful you are, you didn't cause someone else's depression or anxiety or eating disorder or whatever they're struggling with. And therefore, you can't do anything to prevent it from happening again in the first place, right? And so if you continually apologize for things that you didn't do and things you have no control over, if there ever comes a time when you actually need to apologize to this person because you legitimately messed up, your apology can seem kind of empty, because from what that person knows, you just apologize for everything because you don't really know what else to say. This is one of the most common ones that people say when they find out that someone they love is struggling, but it can really have some unintended side effects. And there are other things that you can say instead, which we'll talk about at the end of this section. The next one is, it could be worse. Now, this is the starving children in Africa argument, okay? This is the idea that because someone else has it worse than you, they have worse mental health struggles, they have a lower income, they live in poverty, they struggle with hunger, whatever that is, you then can't struggle with your mental health. So for example, you tell me that you got mugged on your way home from school the other day. And I'm like, well, I mean, you're not dead. So at least, it could be worse, right? How is that helpful? It's absolutely not helpful, right? A lot of students, when I'm telling them about this, they say that they would feel angry. I get a lot of shut ups with a lot of exclamation points at the end. I get a lot of invalidated. I get a lot of, I wouldn't want to talk to this person anymore. They're not a good support system for me. And all of those things are true when you tell someone this. Gratitude is incredibly important. And I think we can always try to be grateful for something in our life. But when you just experienced a trauma or when you're dealing with a mental illness, the last thing that someone needs to hear is you should find something to be grateful about this because other people have it worse. Very not helpful, right? When you tell someone this, you're telling them that their emotions and reactions are unwarranted and over the top. They're being dramatic, right? And at the end of the day, it's really useless to compare the severity of mental illness. One of my favorite quotes goes like this. It says, the person who drowned in 1 foot of water and the person who drowned in 20 feet of water are both dead. The same thing is true for mental illness. It doesn't matter how many feet of water your loved one is drowning under. It matters that they're drowning. Anyone who's struggling with their mental health, they're hurting, they're in pain, and they're coming to you for support. It doesn't really matter whose mental health was worse. It's not your job to justify their struggles. The next one we're going to talk about is it'll be okay. And to talk about this one, I want to tell you a story of a friend of mine who lost her father when she was 7 years old. Now, she vividly remembers all these friends and family members coming to her house, some that she knew pretty well and some that she didn't. And they all said some variation of it'll be okay. It's going to be all right. It'll get better someday. The pain will go away. And even at 7 years old, she vividly remembers all she needed was for someone to tell her that it was okay to not be okay. It was okay to be angry. It was okay to be hurt and confused and scared and uncertain. And that's what she needed to hear. Not that maybe sometime in the future things would be okay. So here's the reasoning behind really isn't the best thing to say to someone. First of all, it might not be okay, or it might not be okay for a very long time. And both of those things are completely okay. When I discuss this sentence with other students, a lot of them are like, how do you know? When is it going to be okay? How are you certain? Are you a mind reader? All of these questions about when start to come up. And as someone who's supporting this person, that's not really something you know or can help them figure out. When you tell someone this, it kind of places this imaginary timeline on their healing. Like, okay, we're here right now, and then over here is okay. And then once we get to okay, then we're good, and we don't have to talk about this anymore. Healing is not that linear. I wish it were. I wish it were so linear, so straightforward, but it is a roller coaster. There are going to be ups and downs and loop-de-loops, and there's nothing you can do about that. Those loop-de-loops are completely okay. Every individual needs to work through their healing journey at their own pace. For some people, that might take a week, some people a year, some people 20 years, and all of those timelines are okay. When you tell someone this, you're also kind of implying that everything goes back to normal when they heal. And that's not necessarily true. Going through something so deep and emotional as a trauma or a mental illness can really change a person. And for you to come in and say, okay, we're going to get to okay. This person may think that they're trying to get to the okay that they were before they went into this period of mental illness. For example, I came out of my mental health struggles with so much deeper levels of empathy and compassion and strength. And those were really positive changes for me. That being said, I was not the same person that I was when I went into that time in my life. So this person, right, they're trying to get back to the okay that they were before whatever they're struggling with happened. So they're working and they're trying and they're healing and they're doing all the things, but they're not really making progress towards their goal because the goal is not something they can get back to. They're a completely different person now. And that could cause them to kind of give up hope. You know, healing's not going to work for me. I'm not making any progress. Why should I try? It's just never going to work for me. The last thing you want to do as the support person in this person's life is cause them to give up hope. Okay. You want to encourage hope. You want to help them believe that healing is possible for them. And while this simple sentence of it'll be okay may not seem like it'll have that consequence, for some people it can. Now, the next one I want to talk about is they didn't mean to hurt you. Okay. So this is particularly for people who survive some sort of interpersonal trauma. So maybe a car accident, maybe a sexual assault, something like that. And this is the concept of, well, Susie was a good person. Bob was a good person. They really didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sure it was just an accident. This gets people fired up. Okay. So let me know in the chat if you opened up to me about something, some trauma that happened to you, and we both know the person who caused it, who is the perpetrator of the trauma. And I'm like, well, they were a good person. They really didn't mean to hurt you. How would that make you feel? What would you want to respond to me with? Okay. ... But they still did it. Absolutely. Right. Who cares? Who cares that they had the best of intentions? To illustrate this, let me tell you a quick story. So let's say that I wanted to give you 1,000 pounds of gold. I wanted to make you the richest person on Ambrose's campus, but I accidentally dropped that gold on your head. Okay, 1,000 pounds of gold, I just dropped it on your head. You would still be hurt. I had the best of intentions, right? But I still hurt you. I still need to apologize. You still need to heal. And oftentimes, someone who's the perpetrator of some sort of interpersonal violence, they do not have that good of intentions, right? Yeah, we also have, but they did hurt me. You're minimizing my pain. 100%. You guys are spot on. The focus of the healing journey for trauma survivors specifically, like I said, it should be on the person who experienced the trauma, not on the person who caused the trauma. It really doesn't matter whether the perpetrator of the violence was a good person or a good student or a good boyfriend or whatever it is. What matters is the person who's coming to you for support is in pain and they need help. And you are the person that they chose to open up to about this. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter who that other person was or how good of intentions they had. Now, the next one is get over it. Okay. Now, simply put, this is rude and insensitive, and I hope that none of you would ever say this to someone. But like I said at the beginning of this section, this is something that I have been told by family members, by friends. This is something that maybe people who don't really understand mental health, they just think it's being weak or having a bad day, will say to someone who's struggling. And so again, I don't think that any of you would ever say this, but I do want to talk about this because it is something that's common to hear as someone who's healing from a mental health struggle. Not only does this deeply harm the healing journey of the person who hears this, but it also puts up a giant brick wall between you and them. And now you are no longer a support system for this person. They can't trust you. They don't feel safe with you. They're not going to come to you for support again, simply because of the fact that this is what you said to them. Okay. When you tell them this, you're telling them that they're being too dramatic and that they're taking too long to deal with what happened to them. As I've said before, every healing journey is unique. It goes at its own pace. That's not a pace that you can determine or foresee. And you have no way of knowing how far along this healing journey they're on. For example, maybe the person who's coming to you has been healing from their anxiety disorder for 5 or 10 years. They've been doing the work. They've been going to therapy. They've been doing all the things. And then you're like, well, just get over it. You have now completely invalidated all of those years of work that they've done. And remember how we talked about hope and encouraging hope in the healing journey? Now they don't have that anymore. Because according to you, it's just a little hurdle they should be able to step over instead of this mountain that they've been climbing for years. The second to last one we're going to discuss is the concept of pushing someone to talk about their story. So it's things like, come on, you should really talk about it. It'll feel better once you get it out into the open. Why won't you just tell me what happened to you? It's those kind of comments, right? The digging for the story. Like I've said before, everyone processes struggles at their own rate. That is their rate, not your rate to choose. And having you sitting there and bugging them to talk about it, it can either force them to speak when they're not ready to, or it could push you away from them. So if you do push them to talk about their story, that could be anywhere from impossible to destructive. Impossible being that they're just not going to, right? They're going to shut down, they're going to stop talking and remove you as a support system in their life. Or destructive, in the sense that opening up about a trauma or a mental illness too quickly can actually be re-traumatizing. And again, I'm sure that's the last thing you would want to do to someone that you love and want to see heal from their mental health struggles. If you find yourself reacting this way, where you are just so curious about what's going on with them, you need to take a moment and evaluate your motives. Why are you reacting this way? We're going to talk more about that in just a second. The last one we're going to discuss is the concept of suggesting different healing methods. So have you gone on a run today? You should try yoga. Oh my gosh, this meditation app totally changed my life. It's suggestions like that. Now, this is the sentence out of the 8 that we've discussed that most people are like, oh shoot, I have said this to someone before. And this is generally the sentence where people have the best of intentions, but this can have some unintended side effects. Your role as a friend or family member is to be there for them and support them. It's not to give them advice on how to heal or try to be their therapist. If you don't have any sort of training as a psychological or psychiatric professional, which I'm assuming, Emily, I'm not sure what department you're in, but I'm assuming most of you do not have that level of training, which is totally fine. You're not really qualified to give them that level of advice. When you go through a healing process yourself, You've probably accumulated some different strategies, some different things that have worked for you. But there's no guarantee that what worked for you is going to work for them. Okay. And you also run the risk of harming their healing journey if you give them a suggestion that maybe backfires for them because you don't know how it's going to work with them as an individual. So, for example, there's a woman named Barbara, and she's a dance movement therapist from Minneapolis. This is a story that she told me of a client of hers before he was a client of hers. And he went to, it was like this crazy dance party thing on the suggestion of one of his friends. He was like, okay, whatever, I'll go give it a shot. And in the middle of this crazy dance party, he started having a psychotic break. Now, the people who were leading the dance party, they weren't mental health professionals. They didn't recognize this and they couldn't support him. And no one in the crowd could either. This incident, right, this very well-intentioned suggestion from a friend set him back multiple steps on his healing journey. Now, I'm not saying that every suggestion you make is going to result in your friend or family member having a psychotic break, but to give a little bit more mundane example, a lot of people who struggle with an anxiety disorder cannot meditate. It is absolutely terrifying for them because they are living in this state of hyperarousal. And for them to sit down and calm down and close their eyes, terrifying for a lot of them. And so that's not going to work. Now, let's say you suggest something. We'll go with that meditation example for a second. And it doesn't have any negative side effects, but it doesn't really work either. This person goes and they're like, okay, I'll meditate. I'll give it a shot. And they do it. And they're like, okay, whatever. Well, it was only the first time. Let me try again. So they meditate again and again and again. And they're never really having any results. Now, this thing that you said would fix everything, it was the cure-all for your mental health struggles. It's not working for them. Remember that hope discussion? Now they may start to have thoughts of, maybe I can't even heal. Maybe this isn't going to work for me. Maybe I should just stop trying because this thing that was supposed to work isn't working for me. Now, again, this is such an innocuous sentence, right? Try meditation. It really worked for me. There is a time and a place to make suggestions and a specific way of phrasing your suggestions. But in general, when someone comes to you with a struggle and you turn around and throw a bunch of healing methods at them, that's not the best way to support that person. And you could be giving them suggestions that could actually backfire them on their healing journey. Now, what do you say instead? We've talked about 8 things that you shouldn't say. And in the next section, you're going to learn that it's actually more about what you do and not what you say. But I do want to give you 2 examples of things you can say to someone if you find that you really feel words are necessary. The first of which is, my heart hurts for you. And before you're like, Jessi, that is so sappy, I am never saying that in my life, hear me out for a second. When someone you love is struggling with their mental health, that can be incredibly painful for you as well. You can have that empathy and feel how much that hurts. And for you to say this to them, you're saying, hey, I acknowledge and accept and receive and honor everything that you're sharing with me. I know that this is your truth, and it is a very deep, real, painful truth for you. Now, you don't want to turn this around and say, oh my gosh, I'm hurting so much and this is so hard for me, and make it all about you. That's not what we want to do. But you're honoring the depth and the pain that they're sharing with you by responding this way. The second one you can use, and this is perhaps my favorite sentence in the entire English language, is I hear you and I'm here for you. The first part of this, I hear you, it does a very similar thing. Honoring, accepting, acknowledging everything that they're sharing with you as their truth, as the truth, right? And the second part, I'm here for you, lets them know they have a teammate. They don't have to go through this alone anymore. They have someone on their side that's going to walk this journey with them. Now, like we're going to talk about, it's more about what you do and not what you say. So let's dive into part 2 about how you can be a good support system for this person. First of all, you have to sort yourself out. We touched on this briefly earlier, but we're going to go into more depth now. In order to be a good support system for someone, you have got to have yourself sorted out, and you need to have your motives in line as well. So are you trying to help this person because you honestly love them and want to see them heal? Or are you just really curious about what's going on with them? Or maybe you have some sort of white knight savior complex like I did in the relationship I talked about at the beginning. You really need to take a hard look at your motives and say, why do I want to support this person? Am I coming at this from the best position possible? If you find that, maybe I'm on the wrong side of this line here, there are some things you can do. First of all, if they invite you, absolutely go partake in a therapy session with them. A lot of therapists, especially in the natural and integrative fields, will incorporate family members and close friends into the therapy process pretty early on because they recognize how difficult it is to heal in a broken home environment. If this opportunity happens, absolutely take your friend or family member up on it. If that doesn't happen, they may come to you with some homework, like a discussion prompt or a letter that they want to read to you. If this happens, please take this seriously because this could be the bridge from where you are as a support system to where you want to be. If neither of those things happen, you can absolutely go get support for yourself. Go find a therapist to talk to for yourself. I guarantee you, if you walk into a therapist's office and you're like, hey, my friend, teammate, cousin, whatever is really struggling with their mental health, I want to be there for them. I don't feel like I'm in a good spot to do that right now because I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. Can you help me out so that I can take care of myself and be a good support system for them? I guarantee if you say that to a therapist, they are going to be very impressed and very willing to help you become a better support system for your friend or family member. Okay. It's a very humble approach to being a support system, and it's going to set you up really, really well for success. Once we've got that sorted out, once we've got our motives in line, we're in a good position to really help this person. The first thing you want to do is validate their emotions. Now, I hate calling anyone the C word. I really don't love it. And that C word is crazy. Okay. I don't believe that anyone is crazy. I don't care if you are in the middle of a bipolar manic episode or a psychotic break. I don't think anyone is crazy. But crazy is a word that I use to describe myself over and over and over in my head when I was struggling with my mental health. It was interspersed with other insults like stupid and lazy and all of these other things that I was telling myself. Your friend or family member might be experiencing the same thing. When they start to heal, they're probably unearthing emotions and memories that can be really painful for them to experience. And they may feel out of control of their thoughts and feelings. It may kind of feel like life is happening to them and they are just struggling to keep up and are just being battered over and over and over again. If you're able to come in and say, hey, everything that you're feeling right now is perfectly okay to feel. You are not crazy. You are not being over dramatic. Everything that you're feeling is okay to feel. That can be so powerful because what you're doing is you're taking so much pressure and judgment and shame off of this person's shoulders and allowing them to redirect that energy into the healing journey. Now, think about this for a second. If you spent 4 hours a day berating yourself, calling yourself names, insulting yourself in your head, versus if you spent 4 hours a day talking kindly to yourself, or even just not talking badly to yourself, think about how much further along your healing journey you would be. That is the power that you have when you validate someone else's emotions. Now, I'm not saying that you tell someone they're not crazy once and then they're good and they never have to remind themselves of that again. But this may be something you have to do, a couple times, reminding them of this. But this can be that split second where they're like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. I can feel this. I'm okay. And then they can work on some other coping mechanisms and healing strategies that they've been working on productively throughout their healing journey so far. Next up, you want to treat them as normally as possible because they are still the exact same person. They've just opened up about a new side of themselves to you, but it doesn't mean they're different. Someone who's struggling with their mental health, they're not broken. They're not weak. They're not about to break, and they don't need to be protected with any sort of kid gloves or anything like that. Whatever you normally do with this person, keep right on doing it. Continue to invite them out to social events. Continue your Sunday morning coffee date. Continue complaining about your annoying relationship. Whatever it is, keep doing it with this person. Now, of course, this is an opportunity for you to examine if there's any toxic habits in your relationship and definitely work on those. But what I don't want you to do is start treating them like they're weird, like they're an outsider, like they're different than everyone else. Because when you treat someone as normally as possible, you allow them to retain a sense of normalcy in their life when everything else, everything internal feels so incredibly abnormal. That is what you can do by treating them as normally as possible. Even if they say no to your Sunday morning coffee date, even if they say no to a social event, keep inviting them, keep making them a part of your life the same way that they were before they opened up about their mental health struggles. Now, if you have been tuning out or simultaneously watching a TV show throughout this presentation, come back to me now because this strategy we're going to talk about, holding the space, is the most important thing you can do. If you forget everything else I talk about today, remember the next 3 minutes, because when you hold the space for someone, you are being the absolute best support system possible, okay? Now, before we go any further, let me know in the chat really quickly, who has heard of holding the space? Who's familiar with this concept at all? Let me know in the chat really quickly. Anyone heard of this before? Okay, perfect. Emily says yes. Never heard of it from Logan. Okay, not a problem. We're going to dive into it here. Perfect. So we got a mixed house today. Totally fine. So this, oh, we got one more. Let's see. I've heard of it, but do not completely know the definition. Yep. So we are running the gamut of familiarity with this tonight. Perfect. So the definition on your screen of holding the space was written by a woman named Heather Plett, and she is a coach that specializes in holding the space. When I read this, I thought it was the most beautiful definition of what it means to hold the space. And so I wanted to share it with you today. She says holding this space means being willing to walk alongside another person in whatever journey they're on without judging them, making them feel inadequate, trying to fix them, or trying to impact the outcome. When we hold space for other people, we open our hearts, offer unconditional support, and let go of judgment and control. I don't know about you guys, but like I said, when I read that for the first time, I was like, whoa, that just hit so hard. It was such a good definition. Another way to look at this is that you have to choose to sit in the dumpster with them, even if you want to climb right on out. Okay, so what do I mean by this? This is a story that was told to me by a woman named Sally, and she's an equine assisted therapist. This is the story of a time she was working with a young girl, a young client on the farm who was struggling with PTSD. And they were playing a game of hide and seek with some other young clients. So this girl looks at Sally and she's like, Sally, let's go hide in the dumpster. Sally's like, okay. So they go and they hide in the dumpster, and it's a dumpster. Right? It's dark, it's smelly, it's gross. There's something dripping over their shoulder. It's not a fun place to be. And this girl looks at Sally and she says, hey, Sal, this is kind of like life, isn't it? And for that little girl, that's what her life was like. It was dark. It was not a fun place to be. And she couldn't just get out whenever she wanted to because of her mental health struggles. Now, for Sally, she could have gotten out of the literal or proverbial dumpster whenever she wanted to, because she was not the one struggling with her mental health. And she also really wasn't the one playing hide and seek either. But for her to choose to stay and choose to sit there in the darkness with that little girl, she was holding the space for her. And that was such a pivotal moment for both Sally and her professional career and that little girl. Now, holding the space is kind of a nebulous concept. It's not super step 1, step 2, step 3, but I did want to share with you 8 pillars or steps to holding the space that you can use if you're implementing this strategy in your own life. So first of all, trust your intuition, okay? Because it is kind of nebulous, trust your intuition and give the person you're supporting permission to trust theirs as well. Next, don't overwhelm them with information. Don't try to shove pamphlets and blog posts and podcasts at them about the different healing methods, because you don't want to overwhelm them to the point where they're like, I could never do this. There's 8,000 things I have to do. Can't do this, not even going to try, right? Next, allow them to keep their autonomy and make decisions for themselves. Remember, their life may feel completely out of control because of what they're struggling with, and they do not need you to come in and take over everything about their lives. The only caveat here is that if it is any sort of dangerous situation, like an addiction or a suicide attempt or something like that, please step in. Please do not have the deliberation that I did when I was in high school. But in general, you do not want to come in and just completely take over their life. Next, and this is a huge one. This is one that I did incredibly poorly. Recognize that their failure is not your failure. So keep your ego out of it. If they have a flashback, a panic attack, a setback, a trigger, anything like that, that is not a reflection on your ability to hold the space for them. It doesn't mean you weren't a good friend. It doesn't mean you loved them improperly. It just means it's their journey. And this is one of those loop-de-loops on the roller coaster that we talked about. Next up, and this is kind of what it means to hold the space in general, create a safe space for them, right? They need to know that they can come to you in any state and they are not going to be judged, shamed, or criticized. After that, if you do offer them help, make sure you're doing it in a way that doesn't make them feel incompetent. You do not need to come in and brush their teeth for them and do their laundry and do their dishes and make them dinner and make their bed. Like, no, they do not need that, right? You don't want to infantilize them. Treat them like an adult, treat them as normally as possible, and offer help in a way that doesn't make them feel incompetent. Next, make sure that they know you are able and willing to catch them if and when they may fall apart. This does not mean that you text them every single day and say, hey, I got you, I got you, I got you, because that's annoying, right? But when you show up with compassion and empathy and strength, this is going to come through in your mannerisms. Finally, allow them to make their own choices, even if those choices are different than the ones you would make if you were in their position. So if they want to exercise a different way, or maybe not at all, if they want to go to a different type of therapy or read a different type of book than you do, it's not your choice to make. That's theirs. And it's your job to support them throughout that process. Now, the last strategy we're going to discuss is about connecting them to resources, because you cannot do it all. You play an incredibly important role in this person's healing journey as a friend or family member, but you are not a mental health professional. That is a different role. That is a different skill set. And so if this person says that they would like some additional help, you can absolutely help connect them to licensed therapists and professionals near you. How do you do that though? How do you know what's out there? How do you know how to find therapists that are licensed in those fields? That's what we're going to talk about now. The first therapy type I want to discuss is standard talk therapy. This is pretty much what everyone thinks of when they think of therapy. These are things like cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, lots of different types of therapy that look pretty traditional, right? Now, talk therapy is amazing. It's a fantastic form of therapy. And there are a huge database of practitioners at psychologytoday.com. You can sort by location, you can sort by specialty, you can even sort by what insurance they take. And I would also highly recommend looking into what campus resources are available as well. Many colleges and universities offer free or low-cost counseling services to their students. And so that's a great place to start if you're looking to pursue this type of therapy or know someone who is. Next up is EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. EMDR uses bilateral stimulation, which is literally the therapist waving their hand back and forth in front of your face, in order to reprogram incorrectly stored memories. Any therapist that's licensed in this field can be found at EMDRIA, which is the International Association.org. And again, huge searchable database, therapists around the world, very common type of therapy. So I definitely recommend checking that out. Next up is craniosacral therapy. And despite the picture, it's not massage. Craniosacral therapy is a form of hands-on practicing, but it's actually using the body's natural healing mechanisms, the same mechanisms that heal cuts and bruises and broken bones, in order to find where energy is stuck in the body and release that energy that often is associated with things like stored trauma in the body or with other forms of mental illness. There isn't any one certifying body for craniosacral therapy, but there is a database of practitioners at iahp.com. And a lot of chiropractors use this work as well. So that could be another place to look. Next is mindfulness and meditation. Now, I know I kind of gave mindfulness and meditation a bad rap earlier in the presentation, but they are fantastic modes of healing. Instead of the goal being to sit there and go for an hour, the goal is actually to train the brain like a muscle to come back to center over and over and over again, essentially on command. This way, if you or someone you love has any sort of panic attack or trigger or flashback or anything like that, their brain knows to come back to the present moment right away. And it makes recovering from those type of events a lot faster and a lot easier. There isn't any certifying body for mindfulness or meditation, largely because there are so many different types of these types of healing. So I would recommend looking for your standard mental health credentials, your LPCs, LCSWs, PhDs, MDs, things like that, and then seeing if they offer any sort of mindfulness or meditation with their standard therapy practice. Next is dance movement therapy. And despite the name, dance movement therapy is not traditional dance. So you will not be expected to tango or ballet across the room in order to work through whatever it is that you're struggling with, or again, that the person you know is struggling with. Dance movement therapy is a creative arts therapy that basically just provides the space for the body to move in whatever way it needs to. This may look like standing strong and feeling what it feels like to stand strong. It may be pushing against something. It may be walking a certain way. It's not dance, right? But it is incredibly powerful because it allows the body to speak. Every body speaks, and sometimes the body knows exactly what it needs to do to heal, even if the mind or the mouth can't convey that in a certain way. Now, in the US, I'm from the US. In the US, there is the American Dance Therapy Association, and they have a great database of practitioners. So I would look at any sort of Canadian Dance Therapy Association, or maybe even an Alberta Dance Therapy Association, to find therapists in this field. Next is trauma-sensitive yoga. And trauma-sensitive yoga is fantastic for anyone who's struggling with a disconnect between the body and mind. This could be a survivor of anything from a sexual assault to an eating disorder. Again, basically anything where the mind and the body are not quite in line like they used to be. The goal of trauma-sensitive yoga is to build that bridge back and allow the space for the mind and the body to learn to trust each other again. Because oftentimes in situations like I just described, that trust has really been broken. That's the goal of trauma-sensitive yoga. Now, therapists that are certified in this type of therapy can be found at traumasensitiveyoga.com, and they have therapists listed all around the world. So there's definitely some. I think I actually know one personally who lives in Calgary. I think I've worked with her before. So yeah, there are definitely trauma-sensitive yoga practitioners in Calgary, and that website has a great database for you to search through as well. Next up is equine-assisted therapy. And equine-assisted therapy has two main models, the EGALA model and the EPONA model. The EGALA model uses a lot of mindfulness activities, movement activities of the scene in front of you, and metaphors to work through a healing journey, whereas the EPONA model uses a lot of mindfulness activities as well, but also movement, like stretching or very simple riding activities with the horse. Therapists that are certified in the EGALA model can be found at eagala.org, and therapists that are certified in the EPONA model can be found at eponaquest.com. Next up is canine-assisted therapy. Canine-assisted therapy is probably the second most common therapy on this list, and it's simply the incorporation of dogs into the healing journey. Dogs are fantastic for everything from breaking the ice to mindfulness activities to regulating the pace at which the person's story comes out. So they are amazing additions to therapy. There isn't any sort of certifying body for canine-assisted therapy, so I would honestly just do a Google search of canine-assisted therapy near me, or maybe also look at the Canadian Kennel Club's website for organizations that train therapy dogs that may be able to connect you with some of their graduates. Next is ecotherapy. Ecotherapy just bridges the healing power of nature with the healing power of therapy. This could look like anything from a multi-day backpacking adventure to indoor ecotherapy, as oxymoronic as that may sound. There isn't any certifying body for ecotherapy, so again, Google search, check the credentials, and then ask if they provide ecotherapy services. Finally, flower essence therapy. Now, flower essence therapy is a very new field in the US and Canada, but it's already incorporated into standard healthcare in places like Brazil, Switzerland, and Cuba, and you can find it in pretty much any corner pharmacy in Spain. Flower essence therapy uses flowers' ability to resonate with the body in order to release some of those top-level coping mechanisms, like your anger, like your fear, like your tendency to run away from things, so that you can actually spend time and energy addressing the root mental illness beneath. There's also something called rescue remedies, which are individualized bottles that can be taken in acute situations like panic attacks or triggers in order to help you return again to center very easily. Now, the third part of this presentation, very quickly before we move into Q&A, is all about how you can keep yourself safe during the process, okay? We want to make sure that you are doing a good job supporting the person you love, but also that you are doing a good job taking care of yourself. Now, in that story I told at the beginning, I don't blame that person for my mental health struggles, but I do feel like I drug myself over his jagged edges. So I'm not saying it was his fault. I'm not saying that he's to blame, but I do feel like that relationship exacerbated my mental illness. This caused a lot of resentment and codependency to build up between us. And honestly, my mental health struggled for years, even after his suicide attempt and the end of our relationship. This is not a purely selfish endeavor either, because you will absolutely be a better support system for the person you love if you're also taking care of yourself. So how do you do that? Okay, there are three very straightforward ways. The first of which is seek your own help. Find a therapist of your own. Use one of the modalities we just talked about. Pick one that resonates with you and go work with a therapist in that field. Next, make sure that someone is holding the space for you as well. Holding the space is not a one and done thing. It's not like I hold it for you and then we're good. I hold it for you. Someone holds it for me, someone holds it for them, someone holds it for them. And there's this whole chain and network of people holding the space for each other. That is how you get community level support or campus level support for mental health concerns. Finally, make sure you're remembering the boundary. You are not a therapist. You are just as important as a therapist, but you have a very different role. Look at this from the other perspective. A therapist is an unbiased third party. They are not a part of your life. So if your therapist started showing up to Thursday night family dinners and gossiping with your mom about your latest partner, that would be kind of weird, right? We would not like that therapist very much anymore because that therapist stepped way over the boundary into friend territory. You don't want to do the same thing by trying to become a therapist. Not only will you not do a very good job of it, but you'll actually be harming not only their mental health journey, but probably yours as well. Now, to recap everything we talked about today, we started by talking about some things you shouldn't say, some things that can be really hurtful to someone else's healing journey. Then we looked at the fact that they're normal still. So validate their emotions, treat them as normally as possible. Then we talked about what it means to hold the space for someone and how that is the most important thing you can do for someone who's struggling. Finally, we talked about what it means to keep yourself safe. And we also discussed some different types of therapy that you can refer them to or that you can use for yourself. Now, in terms of content, that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your evening with me. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, if you want a copy of my slides, if you want to talk in more depth about something or privately about something, please feel free to message me on Instagram or send me an email, and I would be happy to have that discussion with you. That being said, I would love to take any questions we have now. So if you want to put them in the chat or just message me directly, I would be happy to answer those now. If we have no questions, I either did really, really well or really, really poorly. So if we have any questions, please post them in the chat. I'd be happy to answer those. And if not, thank you guys so much for your time and attention. Good, Emily, thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Again, my contact info is on the screen, so please feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. And Madison, I will turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessi. That was a wonderful presentation, and I know I certainly learned a lot, so I hope everyone else did too. Yeah, I'm just reading this last chat in here.
Yeah, Logan, that is a really common thing, right? I know that was something I struggled with a lot. It's something that a lot of people struggle with, so I'm glad that that was helpful for you.
Yeah, like she said, like if you have any further questions, her contact info is on the screen. But other than that, I think we are good to,
Yep, I see this one here. So the question is, do you have suggestions about what to do in a crisis? One, the example you mentioned in your story at the beginning. Yes, I do. So first of all, take some pressure off your shoulders because that is an incredibly difficult situation that literally no one in the world is trained to deal with. So if it is some sort of crisis, like they're saying they're thinking about attempting suicide, things like that, number one, you can always call the police. Always call the police. They will be able to help and intervene. I know I'm from Oregon, and at least in Oregon, a lot of sheriff's departments have licensed therapists and social workers that get to come out on any sort of mental health call. I'm not sure if Calgary has anything similar, but that is an option. So please feel free to call the police. The second thing, and this is probably the biggest tip that you as a support system can do, is if someone is saying, oh, I'm ready to end it all, I'm ready for life to be over, whatever that is, you need to ask them incredibly directly, are you suicidal? Are you thinking of killing yourself? Like, don't beat around the bush. Don't be like, oh, is it a bad day? Like, what does that mean? You need to be incredibly direct about it, okay? Because that directness is what's going to allow them to be honest with you. The other things that you're looking for is if they have a plan. So if they say, it's generally not going to be this direct, but if they say, yes, I'm thinking of killing myself, I already have the gun and my parents are going to be out of the house tonight, so I'm going to do it then. They've named a method and they've named a time. Those are two keys that if you hear that, get in right away. Call the police, get over there as quickly as you can, because those are generally signs that the person is very, very serious about taking their own life, and it's going to happen relatively soon as well. If they're talking in very vague generalities of like, oh, I'm so tired of this, I don't want to do this anymore, kind of those types of sentences, better be safe than sorry, right? So you can still call the police, you can still get your butt over there, but that's not quite as emergent of a situation as when they've named a method and a time and they've stated, yes, I am thinking of killing myself. So hope that was helpful. Crisis intervention is a whole field of study in and of itself, but for someone who's supporting someone else or maybe in that faculty member, teacher role sort of thing, those are the two biggest tips I can give you, is just being aware of their language and then getting the police involved if necessary. Karen, you had a question as well. How do you go about finding affordable counseling? Yes, this is a huge question. There's a couple different options. First of all, I would recommend checking into what resources Ambrose offers. Madison, you might be able to comment on this more than I can, but like I said earlier, a lot of campuses offer free or low-cost counseling services to their students and faculty members. So that would be my first stop. After that, I would look into any sort of community resources that are available. A lot of nonprofits and churches will offer, again, free or low-cost counseling services. So maybe just do some Google searching. If you're involved with a church or a nonprofit, ask them. And then finally, if neither of those options are available to you, you can also look into sliding scale counseling. So sliding scale counseling basically means that you pay based on how much money you make. So it could range anywhere from, at least in the US, like $30 to $75, when normally it's $150. So it's discounted based on how much you can afford to pay. And oftentimes students are discounted the most. So a lot of private therapy or private practice therapists will offer sliding scale services. So that could be another option. Finally, if you're like, I don't know how to find any of those, I would just go talk to a therapist that maybe you know, maybe your friend goes to, and just say, hey, I really want support, but I can't afford this. Can you make any recommendations or referrals for me? And most of them would be happy to do so. Yeah, Madison says Ambrose has counseling at a reduced price, and you can find it at the link in the chat. So definitely check that out. The last thing I'll say about that is that a lot of organizations have crisis lines. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, I need to talk to someone right now, you can call any one of those crisis lines. There's different ones for suicide crisis line, domestic violence crisis line, eating disorder crisis line, lots of different options. I don't have those numbers memorized offhand, but just again, Google search what those crisis hotlines are. Those are free, and there are trained workers on the other end, generally volunteers and not therapists, but they are trained and they're generally very good at their job, that can help kind of talk you through whatever you're struggling with and de-escalate whatever situation you're in. So I hope that was helpful as well. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I will let you get back to your evening. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to message me on Instagram or send me an email. Thanks again, guys.
Yes, and thank you, Jessi. This was really helpful.
Good. Have a good night. Awesome. Oh, did we want to stop recording?
Oh, yes.